Thank you, Max. Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, July 28th, 2021. This is a virtual meeting of the Wilmington, Baltimore Avenue Streetscape Task Force. I want to welcome everybody here. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9 o'clock a.m. Thank you for being here. We're going to start off with roll call. We're going to start off with Jenny Burton, owner and landlord of the shops at 33 Baltimore and the shops at Rehoboth Mews. She is absent today. She let me know ahead of time. Appreciate that. Frank Cole, are you on board yet? I don't see you. We'll look for Frank Cole shortly. He's the owner of Atlantic Cycles and Sea Change Cycles. Frank Cooper.
Here.
Very good, Frank. Welcome today. Daniel Fosnot, manager of the Oceanus Motel. Very good. He's here. Randy Haney, one of the owners of the Blue Moon Restaurant. I see you. Welcome, Randy. Patty Hoffman, owner of Stitch Tatch on North First Street.
I'm here.
You're there. Thank you, Patty. David Mariner, executive director of Camp Rehoboth. Not on yet. Andy Medic is not in attendance. Howard Menaker, resident.
Good morning, Mayor.
Howard, thank you for being here. Alex Moore, partner of the Avenue Inn, Beachview Hotel, property ownership on Wilmington Avenue. Can't hear you. Oh, he's not on yet? Not on yet. Okay, Alex Moore's not on it. Elise Moore, owner of the Admiral on Baltimore.
Good morning.
Hi, got the name right, Elise. Thank you for being here. Bob Pomerantz, owner of the Brighton Suites and owner of Hunt and Lane.
Here.
Welcome, Bob. Glad you're here today. Joe Baker, owner of Henlope and Oyster House and Blue Hen Restaurants.
Good morning, here.
Good morning, Joe. Welcome. Commissioner Edward Shanowski, representing the Rehoboth Beach Main Street.
Morning, Mayor.
We see you there waving your hand. Thank you, Ed. Commissioner Pat Caluzzi, chair of the city's Street and Transportation Committee and the Parking Task Force. Are you here, Pat? Not yet. We'll look for you. And I'm, of course, Mayor Stan Mills, chair of this task force. We do have a quorum. We're able to formally conduct business. With that, I want to identify the project team members. City Manager Sharon Lynn is here with me. Kevin Williams, Public Works Director, is here. Max Hamby from the IT Department. Evan Miller, Project Coordinator, is here. And also I wanted to identify Margaret Carson and Ann Womack here today on the floor. With that, I want to welcome everybody that's watching today. And since this is a virtual meeting, we ask for members of the public to pre-register to sign up to speak. And pre-registered to speak today is Dr. Michael Trejos and also David Garrett, I believe it's Garrett, from Main Street. And we'll call on you at the appropriate times. And with that, I want to recognize that we have one set of minutes that were distributed earlier to the commissioners, and I would like to have us vote on those. These are seeking approval of minutes of our June 16th task force meeting. Are there any corrections to be made? Yes, sir, Howard.
I'd like to move adoption of the minutes as submitted.
I'll second.
All right, we've got a motion by Howard Maneker and a second by Frank Cooper to adopt the minutes, the draft minutes of June 16th as presented to us. All those in favor signify by raising your hand and holding it up for a count. Let me see here. All right, I'm going to raise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All righty, very good. So we've got 11. Anybody has corrections or votes no? No, and so the minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you very much for getting that out of the way. With that, I want to identify correspondence we have embedded into the agenda. The comments from Dr. Michael Trejos. I think they're somewhat self-explanatory. We likely won't get to them today, but at our next meeting. But again, they are embedded in the agenda. For old business, we're going to move into new business. Our intention today, for today's task force meeting, is to receive the Streetscape Concepts as presented by Rossi Group, but also to allow us for questions so that we walk away with a full understanding of their proposals. When we gain full understanding, then each of us can give thought to and analyze the concepts in preparation for full discussion at our next meeting on August 4th, 9 a.m. So again, because of this intention to enter into educated discussion on August 4th, we may likely defer on discussion of the merits of the proposals today, again, pushing discussion to the August 4th meeting and focusing today primarily on the presentation and again, asking questions so that we gain a full understanding of the proposals. We will not be talking about amenities today. As we've talked about before, amenities come way later in the game. And what we're looking at are the broad concepts. If you recall, the basis for a lot of what Rossi is doing in terms of designing and presenting concepts today stems from the guidelines developed by this very task force and which are also embedded in the agenda, so we don't need to review those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Williams, who I think will introduce the Rossi partners.
Thanks, Mayor. At this point, I'll introduce Alexis Morris to take us through her presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. So let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen.
And Alexis, we might want to do the same program we did for your first presentation, and that is reserve questions for the end. And then if we need to, we can start at the beginning again. But I think perhaps it's best to just let you go through the whole thing.
That would be great, yeah.
Whatever you like. Thank you. Go ahead.
Of course, if there's something that's coming across unclear, feel free to interrupt. And also, if I need to speak up, I know sometimes I can trail off a little bit. So just a real quick overview, as we've discussed previously. Rossi is a consultant to DelDOT, and DelDOT's administering Federal Highways Transportation Alternatives Program. That's the program that's funding the current concept development for Baltimore Wilmington Avenue Streetscape. So based on our initial scope of work, based on city guidance received, the focus of the concept will be to widen walkways for pedestrian traffic and outdoor activities, increase safe pedestrian and bicycle travel, provide connectivity to Rehoboth Avenue, increase lighting, and incorporate green infrastructure. And with that in mind, we'll go through briefly today the task force recommendations and how we've attempted to address those recommendations or demonstrate those within the concept. A quick overview of the concept that we've developed, and then a brief discussion of the limited vehicle access zones, pedestrian plaza concepts, and kind of what that might mean for the city, and then an overview of next steps. So for task force recommendations, the overarching interest was, of course, to bring the pedestrian and bicyclist and other alternate modes of transportation onto Baltimore Wilmington Avenue, and include streetscape elements to kind of attract that type of traffic and provide pedestrian amenities. To address the overarching interest, what we've outlined here, and I think the mayor did a good job of introducing it, was really we're providing a transportation framework, outlining what those minimum requirements are or what the transportation footprint will look like. So we've got through lanes between 11 and 12 feet throughout the project area. And then our parking dimensions include an 18-foot wide head-in parking and an 8-foot wide parallel parking. We've also outlined where no parking would be permissible. So that's at driveways, near intersections, fire connections, and areas of that variety. Outside of the curb to curb, is basically between the curbs and the right of way. What we've called that area is the pedestrian circulation path. So that pedestrian circulation path is comprised of a number of different things. Principally, the most important element, I think, is this pedestrian access route. So we've defined that as a 5-foot minimum route throughout, but that can be variable. The 5-foot comes from ADA guidance. And then outside of that, between the PAR and the curb line is the buffer area. And that's where a number of your pedestrian amenities can occur, whether that's signage, vegetation, seating, and then the frontage zone is between the PAR and building frontage. So demonstrating kind of that concept of what the pedestrian circulation path is comprised of, here's a picture of Rehoboth Avenue. So streetscape has already occurred on Rehoboth Avenue. And as you can see here, so the sidewalk itself is broader than just the PAR, and it includes the building frontage and the buffer area. But within that buffer area, that's where the trash cans are sited. That's where your pay stations are sited. All of those necessities, but also the amenities such as bench seating and things like that. So kind of to go into detail of what the PAR is, again, that's the unobstructed route. That's where you're ensuring that you have that ADA accessibility. It can be no less than 5 feet in width, with the exception of it can go down to 4 feet, but only for short durations, pinch points. And then cross slopes no less or at less than or equal to 2%, no vertical gaps, and your vertical clearance, and this is kind of your above head height, has to be greater than 80 inches. So taking that concept of the pedestrian access route onto First Street, so this is the same exact corner with Rehoboth Avenue, but looking north. As you can see on First Street, we have a little bit of a challenge in that the right-of-way, the sidewalk actually extends outside of the right-of-way. So the right-of-way here is essentially to the building awning, but that sidewalk area is greater than the right-of-way itself. From a pedestrian circulation path in our concept, what you'll see is that we've only considered the pedestrian circulation path to be within the existing right-of-way, and that came at direction from the city. So on First Street, what you can see here too is the pedestrian access route is actually less than that 5-foot desirable, with the fire hydrants, utility poles, things like that, forming obstructions. And then the other pieces of the pedestrian circulation path, and that's what would be developed later. Those are the amenities that would be discussed at a later date, right? And that's where the stormwater, green infrastructure is going, landscaping, bike parking, street art, benches, trash cans, kind of the whole gamut of the amenities that we want to see in a streetscape. Again, we're really focusing on outlining the footprint for where those amenities might be desirable and feasible. The other recommendation that we received from the task force was regarding shared bike lanes. So our lane widths throughout the entire project area, they're consistent with DelDOT road design manuals for shared roadway, no bike designations. The city can include signage or sharrow pavement markings, and this will be determined later. But essentially the roadway travel lane widths that we've provided are adequate to include bikes and vehicles on the existing roads or the travel lanes. And then the other recommendation that we heard from the task force was for a tapered travel lane within the first block of Baltimore and Wilmington Avenue. Now, we spoke a little bit with the project team about this, and it seemed that the focus was really to increase views of the boardwalk and the beach. But tapered travel lanes would be in conflict with our goal to widen the walkways. So really what you can see here, and this is just a quick snapshot, we'll show a more detailed view of the concept later. But what we've done is we've provided the consistent travel lane width, with the exception of widening at the intersection, and parking throughout the corridor, but it's the pedestrian circulation path. And that's the area that's tapering. That's the area that's broadening your views of the beach as you get closer to the boardwalk. And then using turn lanes selectively. So our concept provides turn lanes where they exist today. So southbound North 1st Street, northbound South 1st Street, and northbound South 2nd Street. And then the treatment of the street ends. So we had discussed previously a limited vehicle access zone or a pedestrian plaza. And really citing that within this area is a little bit of a challenge. So what we consider was the existing and planned usage, as well as access requirements. So where parking lots are, parking garages are, to determine feasibility and location for a limited access zone or pedestrian plaza. And we'll talk about that in detail with our concept. We also ran modeling. So we coordinated with the city, the police and fire chiefs to find out what their vehicle sizes are, what their needs are. And what we've done is we've run modeling to ensure that essentially all of the turning movements that are out there today would be provided for with our concept. We're not prohibiting any of those existing movements or accessibility. And then parking. So we inventoried everything that's existing. What we've provided is an estimate of what could be proposed. So all of the parking that we've shown meets those minimum design guidelines that the task force discussed previously. We designated the parking areas versus the no parking zones. We changed all of the angle parking to head-in parking, and that was really a better usage of that space. It helps to provide additional parking. And we also considered and provided, where feasible, additional scooter parking. It's important to know that the parking inventory that we're providing as far as estimated, so all of those spaces, they're subject to revision. The city is currently undergoing revision of standards regarding ADA spaces, but there would also have to be coordination with property owners regarding fire, driveway and access locations, and then fire access, of course. And on South 2nd Street, we were also asked by the task force to take a look at the, for lack of a better term, shoulder that is on the easternmost pavement section. We coordinated with DelDOT because this section is a DelDOT jurisdictional road. In this eastmost pavement section, DelDOT was able to confirm this is a striped shoulder. It's not considered a turn lane, despite the fact that it may be being used in such a way today. So what we've done is we've sketched in 2 additional parking spaces. It would be up to the city and DelDOT to coordinate in the future to determine whether or not the addition of those 2 parking spaces is desirable, for lack of a better word, because one thing to consider when you're looking at that is, yes, you've gained 2 parking spaces, but it also, there's no continuity with that feature north or south of the area. So utility undergrounding also. This details outside of Rossi's scope of work. It's also outside of DelDOT and Federal Highways funding criteria. But what we've demonstrated in the concept is that within the pedestrian circulation path, we could feasibly accommodate transformers if they had to be pad mounted. Those could also, if the utilities are completely put underground, those could be done so in vaults. There would still have to be access panels for those, and those would have to be located outside of the PAR. So essentially the transformer locations that you see here today, consider them potentially the vault locations as well. But again, those specific locations are just for illustrative purposes. They're not engineered utility locations, and future undergrounding would require adjustments to the water and sewer, as well as drainage features throughout the area. And stormwater management. So our concept would accommodate areas for stormwater management and best practices. Those could include a number of different features, whether that's bio-retention areas, permeable surfaces, tree pits, etc. That analysis and design, along with drainage analysis and design, would have to come later and in the final design phase. So for drainage, our concept, we've assumed partial roadway reconstruction, new curb and bulb out at locations, and maintaining the existing drainage patterns and inlets and pipes. Relocations would only occur where required. And then the beach patrol and restroom facilities. So through coordination with the city, we've received the most recent updated plans, but this project's preceding our design and construction. So that coordination is going to have to continue throughout the project duration. Obviously, we would want to make sure that we're providing function, aesthetic compatibility, but also that ADA accessibility. And within the concept design, what we've done is we've treated the intersections with bump out and curb extensions. This is a great amenity for pedestrians because it helps to increase visibility and shortens crossing distances. It also provides some additional space for the pedestrian circulation path, for landscaping and amenities, maybe benches, bike parking, things like that. The challenge with the bump out and curb extensions that would have to be considered, obviously, by the city is it does decrease maneuverability for turning vehicles. So while we've ran our modeling to confirm that the existing turn movements would be feasible in the build condition, the challenge with that is it does decrease the maneuverability. So it's feasible, but potentially the vehicles are having to take slower turns. We also would include upgraded ADA ramps and upgraded crosswalks throughout the project area at all intersections. So does anyone have any questions, or did I run through that too quickly, I guess, before we get into kind of the concept itself?
Well, let's hold off the questions to the very end, because what we might want to do is go through the presentation again, because I've got some targeted questions that I'm going to need to point to individual slides on. So let's go ahead and continue, if you would, Alex.
Oh, right, not a problem. So our concept itself, essentially what we've done here, and I don't want to get into too much detail for each block, because obviously these are here for reference by the task force, and when the task force is having your discussions, you can zoom in on certain areas and things like that. But as you can see, Baltimore Avenue, second block, we've got the parallel parking, which is consistent with what's out there today on the westernmost side, changing to some head-in parking as you near First Street. You'll note on the south side of Baltimore Avenue, there's a section there where we've not provided parking on both sides, and that's because in order to do so, we would start impeding that pedestrian access route. So by removing parking on one side, we're able to enhance the pedestrian circulation path and ensure that we're providing that 5-foot minimum pedestrian access route throughout. We've also shown or demonstrated bike parking throughout the corridor. Those are suspected to be not non-permanent fixtures based on conversations with the city. They could be moved. And again, anything else that you're seeing here could feasibly be moved. We have shown scooter parking. So kind of as an aside, that scooter parking, the widths on those are 3 by 8 feet. And the transformer dimensions that we've used here, basically assuming a consistent dimension, but we're showing those as 8 by 7 feet. So again, what goes out there, what might be needed would be a product of the coordination by the city with the utility companies. So, and then Baltimore Avenue first block, again, demonstrating where no parking's feasible because of driveways and fire connections. You're also seeing pay stations and scooter parking, bike parking consistently throughout. You've got the ADA ramps at the intersections. At the far east end, between the roadway terminus and the boardwalk, we've outlined where that beach patrol is being constructed by others or being designed by others. So one thing that we also looked at when we were looking at Baltimore Avenue, again, this connection with the boardwalk, was the idea of the limited vehicle access zone, the pedestrian plaza. And as you can see here, we've got a couple different major parking areas. So where we can fit that space in becomes a little bit of a challenge, because certainly we can't prohibit access to the parking garages and things of that variety. We also don't want to prohibit delivery access. So when we looked at that, really, essentially, we would consider moving the terminus of Baltimore Avenue, what is this, about 50 feet to the west, and providing a limited vehicle access area between the roadway terminus and the Beach Patrol Station. So this other area west of that would just be no parking turnaround area. Essentially, the same movements that are out there today would still occur in the future. Within that Plaza area, and this is just a quick sketch for discussion purposes, obviously what the city wants out there would be up to the city, but kind of an idea of what the idea of a plaza could be, you know, whether it was statuary or some sort of vertical element, landscaping features, a splash pad, other amenities, to essentially make this a pedestrian-friendly environment to get people, draw people off of the boardwalk. One of the challenges with Baltimore Avenue, of course, is because there's that two-story Beach Patrol headquarters going in, you would want to show something that feasibly you could see from the boardwalk, even behind that headquarters, to draw people onto Baltimore Avenue and get them to, again, walk down and explore the shops and other amenities in that area. So Wilmington Avenue, second block, not unlike Baltimore in the way that we've outlined the pedestrian access route. We have had to eliminate some of the parking this time on the north side to make sure that we're providing an adequate access route, but also pedestrian circulation path area. We've outlined where the ramps are, bike amenities and things like that. And then Wilmington Avenue, first block. So here what we've shown is the kind of streetscape typical section all the way to the existing terminus of the roadway with the boardwalk. Again, what we looked at here for a limited vehicle access zone, a pedestrian access path, was we were looking at the usage of the buildings, the businesses that abut the roadway themselves, and access within those. So access to the parking garage or parking lot behind the Green Turtle, things of that variety. And based on that, we came up with the idea of potentially a limited vehicle access plaza that could be situated between a turnaround or a cul-de-sac area on Wilmington Avenue and the boardwalk itself. We were instructed that the existing pavilion, there would be no hurt feelings, or not terribly hurt feelings, if that pavilion went away. We did run turning modeling again, just to make sure that a regular vehicle could make this turnaround in this area. And then we would recommend just kind of a drop-off zone, so that if somebody wanted to drop someone off at the boardwalk, they could feasibly pull over for a few minutes, let that person out, whether this is for Uber or Lyft or families or whatever the case may be, just providing that pull-off area. So within that, you know, things that might be considered is whether or not a shade amenity is desirable, landscaping, again, a vertical element. Just the plazas are really just an opportunity to kind of provide some placemaking for individuals and connecting the streets themselves to the boardwalk. On North First Street, second block. So based on conversations that we had previously, based on task force recommendations, essentially we've removed the parking on the west side of First Street, second block, and really the west side of First Street throughout. And that's consistent with the comprehensive development plan that was previously approved by the city. You'll notice that we've stopped essentially the extent of this project kind of at the separation between residential space and commercial. And that we provide existing on-street parking for the residential facility that's there. But again, we're maintaining some consistency with the CDP as well. And we're maintaining parking on the east side of First Street. On North First Street, first block, we looked at two different options. What we would be recommending is complete removal of parking on this first block of North First Street. And the reason for that, what you can see in the second picture here, the parking with the east side, it's a pedestrian access route because of the narrow roadway widths. would actually be reduced to less than 5 feet in some cases, or many cases, less than 4 feet throughout the entire duration. And if you'll recall from an ADA standpoint, the access route can't be less than 5 feet except for short durations. What you're seeing here, obviously, is that it's not a 2 to 4 foot area, but a far greater expanse than that. So the recommendation coming from Rossi and DelDOT at this time would be for no parking on North First Street within the first block, and that provides the additional space required for streetlights, that provides additional space required for utility poles if needed, and travel lanes meeting our minimum standards. And then on South First Street, similar to the terminus, or I'm sorry, South First Street, okay, yeah, similar to the terminus in the second block on North First Street. So we've stopped our improvements kind of at the transition between the commercial district and the residential areas. So no parking within the commercial district, and that provides for adequate pedestrian access route, but also the circulation path. And then within the first block, again, we've eliminated parking on the west side. There is no parking on the east side today, and that would maintain throughout the area. On South 2nd Street, so again, we had previously discussed where we sketched in 2 additional parking spaces. Whether or not that's a desirable feature would have to be discussed between DelDOT and the city, certainly, but what we've shown here is that it could be a feasible option. Within the first block, much of this area remains as is today. The curbs are adjusted a little bit to accommodate travel lane widths per our minimum recommendations. But as you can see, we've got adequate space for the pedestrian access route and a little bit of extra buffer area for pedestrian circulation path. So we've got some depictions here, really just the highlighting the intersections, so that if the task force wants to take a look at those, provide specific recommendations, or have specific questions at these locations, feel free to do so. And the parking inventory. So per the task force recommendation, we've provided a block by block inventory of existing parking and existing scooter parking. And then we've shown what the concept would potentially provide for proposed passenger vehicle parking and proposed scooter parking. So we've certainly, you know, at Summit, we have lost some passenger vehicle parking, but we've certainly enhanced the proposed scooter parking throughout the corridors. And again, this goes on a block by block feature, just so that the task force can kind of really dig into what's going on in those areas. And then First Street and North and South. The limited vehicle access zones. So just wanted to talk real quick because, you know, I know we have that sketch shown up, but again, we're not prescribing what would go on in these areas. I think more the idea that we wanted to convey to the task force is the limited vehicle access area, the pedestrian plaza, it could be any number of things. You know, some photos that I've shown here, they're really just provided for inspiration. If that's the direction the task force wanted to go in, if that's the direction that the city wanted to go in. And then some vertical elements, whether they're, you know, tall features that can be seen from a number of blocks away, or smaller kind of understated features, but still they become iconic features known to Rehoboth. You know, maybe everybody who visits Rehoboth wants to take a picture next to this memorial, whatever that might be. So our next steps. Basically, this is our draft concept. We want to go ahead and get your feedback. We want to get the feedback from the city of Rehoboth and further refine this concept. Our next step will also include cost estimating and phasing. And then we would propose presenting that concept at the public meeting, or a public meeting / workshop in September. So essentially here's our schedule, with today being July 28th. We'd be asking for task force comments and feedback and the city's feedback by August 13th, so that we have adequate time to refine the concept, and again, prepare the phasing and prepare the cost estimating for a public meeting, public workshop in September, with the draft final presentation end of October and wrapping up our final report in November. Of course, the meeting workshop date would be finalized by the city. So that is the conclusion of our presentation. Again, we'll go ahead and hop back. I know you guys have some questions, so feel free.
Thank you, Alexis. What I'd like to do is actually go back to the very beginning of the first slide and go through it again. It only took us a half hour to, less than half hour to go through this. What I'd like to do is entertain questions. As I mentioned at the beginning, my desire is for us to walk away from today's meeting with a full understanding of every concept presented. I certainly have a lot of questions, that I'd like to ask on individual slides, as I'm sure individual members do. And I've also got a lot of opinions that I want to share. But again, today is not the time I am targeting for us to share opinions, so I'd like to refrain from offering opinions on the concept. Let's ask questions, let's gain a full understanding, and then at our August meeting is when we can really dig into this and start sharing opinions and seeing if we can come to a resolution on concepts we like or don't like or anything like that. So while we are sharing the screen, I want to remind all the members that I cannot see everybody. And let me see here. No, I can only see a few of you. So what you're going to need to do is just shout out your name and let me call on you so you can ask your questions. And we'll go with that route. So slide 1, slide 2. Alexis, if you would just remind us on the next slide on FHWA, what that acronym stands for.
Sorry, yes, that's Federal Highway Administration. So the Transportation Alternatives Program is a federally funded program, and DelDOT's administered to that.
All right. Any questions? Hearing none, we'll go to the next slide. Any questions? I'm going to do this fairly fast, so make sure you speak up. Next slide, next slide. Overarching interest. This course mimics our guidelines. Next slide. Overarching interest. Again, mirrors our guidelines. Next one. PCP, I think, is also phencyclidine, hallucinogenic, but here it's pedestrian circulation path. I did want to further define building frontage. Help clarify for me, is building frontage only private property? Or
No.
Can it also be a combination of private property and city property?
Absolutely, it can be. So the building frontage zone, that's really just that space within which things might be set, but they're nearer the building side than the buffer side and outside of the pedestrian access route. That pedestrian access route, and I think that it's demonstrated a little bit better on our next slide. So, the building frontage is that immediate space in front of the building. So, maybe if the shop here wanted to have a rack with t-shirts for sale or something like that, that would be a feasible and acceptable thing to have in front of the building. But obviously that is outside of a pedestrian access route. So essentially where your primary travel lane, for lack of a better term, for pedestrians is.
So it's really just the area between the front facade of the building and the outer edge of the pedestrian access route, regardless, with no affinity for whether it is private property or public property. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Any questions? If not, we'll go to the next question. I'm sorry, the next slide. The next slide, pedestrian access routes, unobstructed route. On that slide, you mentioned no vertical gaps. Could you explain that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that just indicates that it has to be level. So essentially somebody, whether, it be somebody with a wheelchair or somebody with limited mobility, nothing that they're going to essentially stub their toe on or get hung up on. So the idea sometimes when you're walking around a sidewalk. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, no tripping hazards for the able-bodied and otherwise gaps that a wheelchair user would run into.
Absolutely, absolutely. So essentially when you're walking on a sidewalk that might be in somewhat disrepair, sometimes you'll see that those slabs don't really connect. One might be sunken down lower than the other one. And that obviously interferes with access for all.
Well, that all segues into ADA compliance, I believe.
Absolutely.
Okay. The next, any questions? No, next slide. Any questions? Next slide, or
I did.
PCP elements.
I had a question about the last slide showing.
Yes, sir. Frank Cooper, go ahead.
Frank Cooper, pedestrian access route. This shows the PAR running into the phone poles, and I think that this is interesting because later what you've shown later in your proposed eliminates that problem, does it not? Isn't that what the goal of removing that parking? Because the fact is that there isn't enough room on this street for a PAR at all. I mean, it literally goes away. So I just thought it interesting to note the reality of that the building access area on this street is private property and could go away, as Ed Zanowski pointed out, that they could actually build out to that. So if we don't allow for it now, I understand that if I'm not wrong, that could go away and we could end up with virtually no sidewalk if we don't address this.
Thank you, Frank.
Absolutely. And thanks for pointing that out. I think that's what we were trying to demonstrate with this image here.
That's a good slide also, just to reinforce our desire to underground.
Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Next slide, PCP elements. The next slide is tapered lanes. I certainly have an opinion on that, and we voted on to do that. But I think we'll address our thoughts on that again at the next meeting. That's tapered travel lane. Are there any further questions here? I made in my individual notes, and I said, wow, look at the number of aprons and driveways there. Yeah, they consume a lot of space, and that's just a statement. Any questions? All righty. Use turn lanes. Well, we went through that. This is exactly from our guidelines. Next slide, treatment of street ends. Next slide, need for delivery and emergency vehicle access. I really don't have a question. I have a statement that's maybe more, I don't know when it's appropriate, but after the Lake Avenue Streetscape project, I am very leery of turn radiuses and using engineering programs to determine turning radiuses. Up in the Lake Avenue phase 2 project, we did that and we actually had to take one curve out because it was not an adequate turning radius. So when we take this up at the next meeting, I'll probably bring that up and question that. Are there any questions for this one?
Yeah.
Mayor?
Frank Cooper. Yes, sir, Frank.
Yeah, I question this too. I mean, I'm certainly in favor of the bike parking and whatnot, but I had a question about what is the minimum? I mean, in a practical sense, I mean, you Mayor, mentioned that you had to take one out. I don't know what the federal standards or the state standards are, but what has what does the city found? What did your people find was the minimum acceptable when you ran into problems before?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll try to organize our approach at the next meeting, and this I think would certainly be a bullet point for us to talk about. That would be turning radiuses and also these bulb outs or bump outs, as I call them. So we'll put that all on the docket for the next meeting.
Okay.
Mayor, this is Howard Menaker.
Yes, Howard.
As part of that discussion, I think it would be important to have the police and fire department weigh in on their standards and the practical applications. And I would include also the east ends of Wilmington and Baltimore. I think we'd all like to see restricted access areas, but I want to know how that impacts fire and police protection.
Yeah, we'll bundle them all together as a big discussion bullet. Thank you, Howard. The next slide is parking. Are there any questions? If not, we'll go to the next slide, South 2nd Street parking.
Okay, can I ask one thing about the last parking thing there?
Yes.
I had a question about on scooter parking, just because of the shape of scooter parking areas, the little parking areas. Is it acceptable to put those alongside of restricted areas? In other words, areas that are in front of, say, a fire hydrant, which are marked off with yellow lines. Is it acceptable to use those as access to scooter parking so that you could have scooters in, let's say, an angled parking space one alongside of each other, have 4 deep, and then use that same space that you had allotted for no parking in front of the fire hydrant to be accessed? Is that legal? Is that doable at Lexus?
What we'll do, Frank, is Chief Banks here. He's making a note of all your questions and everything, and we'll address that as a bullet point at our next meeting also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? We'll go to the next slide. South 2nd Street parking. I'd just like to double check what is the meaning of a striped shoulder. In other words, it's not a designated travel lane. It's not designated as a turn lane. It's a no man's land, which can be converted to a turn lane, can be converted to a travel lane, can be converted to parking, question mark.
Yeah.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Very good. Very good. Any other questions on this slide?
Yeah,
Yes, Frank Cooper.
Alexis, when we were talking about this slide, she said that there was no, I'm paraphrasing, that there were, as far as adding the parking spaces, that there was no other parking spaces adjacent to this. Is that what you were saying? And that goes for, I mean, I can see the way this picture is that there are none, but prior to that, there are parking spaces, are there not, in the previous block heading south?
Frank, hold on to that thought, because further down in here, there's actually aerials or diagrams of those blocks. So bring that up again, if you would. Any other questions on this particular slide? We'll go to the utility undergrounding. Let's pause for just a minute. Kevin Williams, would you be able to give us a quick status report? If everybody recalls, we've hired what is it, JMT, I think, as our expert consultant with undergrounding. You want to just give us a little status? You're working with them, I assume, and
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, we actually met with representatives from Delmarva Power and JMT last week on site. They walked the complete site, both streets, or all 4 streets, to get a feel for what would need to be done. JMT was able to get input from Delmarva on where tie-ins would need to go, that kind of thing. So they're in the data collection mode at this point. I think, Evan, they're due to come back in 3 or 4 months with kind of the report.
so what is their partnership with Rossi? Rossi, we know, is not really getting into the undergrounding other than the minimal information they're providing here and just some guesstimates of locations of transformers. Is JMT eventually going to partner with Rossi, or they're just going to take the concepts and do their own thing?
At this point, I think they're just doing their own thing. It's not in their scope right now to coordinate with JMT, although they have some history together. So they have reached out and have spoken as to what each are doing, but it's not in their scope right now to do any direct coordination.
All right. So
tie them together.
thank you, Kevin. So the point is for us, Rossi's trying to give us some ideas, but the definitive ideas on undergrounding will come from JMT at a future point. Is there any other questions on utility undergrounding? If not, we'll go to the next slide. Stormwater management, I think it was Joe Baker. I think, Joe, you were mentioning of the flooding incidents at your place. We're going to need to meet with you, and frankly, I think we're going to have to reach out to all the businesses in our project area to advise us if they have any flooding incidents that we need to be aware of, because we're out there, but we're not necessarily cognizant of every situation where it's flooding. So I think we'll reach out somehow to everybody.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I had a question. What are tree pits?
Tree pits are just those areas where you have trees planted within the pedestrian circulation path, for lack of a better.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Are they lined pits such that they are designed to retain the tree roots so that it doesn't upheave the sidewalks?
There's different ways of doing it, and that would have to be a consideration in final design.
Good. Thank you. Frank, you all right?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I had talked to a landscaper about just that because of the objection that some of the people had about trees elevating the sidewalks and causing disruption there, and what the alternatives were. And I was wondering whether these tree pits are in fact that. So they can be, in other words, is the answer there.
Great, thank you. I want to pause just a minute and let members of the public know that after we get through this second set of slide review with our questions, we'll call on the public at that time. So we're not forgetting anybody. Next slide is drainage. I think I already addressed that. Beach patrol and restroom facilities. I think we're at the point, pretty close to the point where, Kevin, are they going to do a couple elevations or something? And then we would be able to share those with you all. I think though it's important to address, maybe even right now, that we have an existing restroom building. We have an existing beach patrol building co-located with that. Those are not going away. What we're planning on doing is renovating them, adding a second floor to it for the beach patrol building. That allows us to expand the first floor restroom facilities for the men's and women. It allows us to expand the first floor area with family restrooms and also changing rooms. We don't have any other way. I mean, the idea would be that if we had city property elsewhere, we could relocate everything and have that entire end of the street open like we do at Wilmington Avenue. But the reality is we don't do that. We can't do that. We can't buy the Grotto building next door for $3 million and put our restroom facility there and our Beach Patrol there. The Beach Patrol, they're in a strategic location. There are no other locations that can go. So we have to work within what we've got. And it is being designed to try to look pretty, of course. And it's also being designed to have the maximum amount of pathway on the south and north sides of the building to be able to invite people up to Baltimore Avenue. So I just wanted to state that you know, that building is there and it's gonna be there. So are there any questions?
Yeah,
Mayor?
yeah, go ahead.
Frank and then Howard.
Yeah, my question was, you said that we don't have any other land. I have been looking at this because I think it's one of the biggest obstacles that we have in our overall goal of creating a more pedestrian friendly and inviting atmosphere to Baltimore Avenue. And there's a big difference between Wilmington Avenue, which has a lot of street traffic off of the boardwalk any given time, especially in the evenings, and virtually none in Maryland Avenue. And the Beach Patrol building is the reason. I mean, it's a giant block. And I'm questioning, why can't that be moved to Maryland Avenue, where you don't really have the desire to draw people off of the beach, and the amenities of Maryland Avenue swapped to here? I mean, it seems to me there is room for it, just one block down. And
let me pose that to the city staff, and we'll address that at the next meeting. I don't want to push everything off the next meeting, but
no, but
I'm trying to organize and plus give everybody time to contemplate.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up. It's just like contemplate getting rid of that thing at the end of the street, because it's, you know, it's a big building, and the whole nature of it is very obstructing and very uninviting.
All right, thank you, Frank. Howard Menaker.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to approach it from a different angle. If we assume that it can't be moved, and we assume that the city's going to go forward with the plans they have, can you share with us the schedule for that? Here's my concern, and again, we can answer this next week or next meeting, but if they go ahead and get all the way to final design before we have a chance to talk about what we think the end of Baltimore Avenue looks like and feels like, then I think we're way behind every purpose that this task force is all about. And so I would hope we could coordinate with them rather than have them get too far ahead of our work.
I don't know that we know timing and schedules right now, but you make a good point. And also remember that in the guidelines, a motion made by you, I think, Howard, and seconded by Frank, in that we would certainly have the designer for the streetscape and the designer for the Beach Patrol building or restrooms work together. I just don't know what the timeline is. Kevin, you don't?
We should have schematics on the Beach Patrol headquarters within the next few weeks.
All right, so we're getting close to finishing the schematics on the Beach Patrol headquarters, and then it's a matter of marrying that to Streetscape.
Thank you.
I have a question for Kevin. Is there kind of regarding Howard's timeline, is there a particular deadline that you have? Is there some critical element to this timing wise that requires this building to be remodeled and enhanced? Or is this something that just kind of a process thing that generally needs to be done?
Well, obviously it's been on the Beach and Boardwalk Committee's agenda for certainly the time I've been here, about looking at expanding that and providing additional facilities there. The timing that has been set so far is to get the design done this fiscal year. And then if commissioners want to move forward with construction, then we have it in enough time to be able to put it into the budget for next year or whatever year they want to do it. So that's the timing of the actual design, is to meet our budget scheduling requirements for next year, if they decide to move forward.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I think there's time to integrate both projects, Frank and Howard. So, any other questions? Next slide is intersection treatment. Seems self-explanatory. I think there's some discussion points for next week. Any questions? If not, we'll move to the next slide, where we're going to go into concepts. Baltimore, first block. Does everybody understand the orange line there? That is a
Par.
minimum 5 foot clear, I'm going to call it sidewalk, if you will, pedestrian
Access.
circulation area. And then the yellow identifies areas outside that 5 foot minimum. I just want to make sure everybody understands that concept. And then within the yellow, they're saying that's where you can put amenities or bike racks and everything. I have some comments for it next week, but I understand the concept. Does anybody have questions?
Mr. Mayor, I think the only thing to make sure is clear, I guess, in your clarification. So the sidewalk itself can extend into the yellow area as well. We are not intending to imply that it is a 5 foot wide sidewalk throughout the project area, but rather that sidewalk can be variable within the yellow area. It's just the orange is its minimum. And again, that alignment too can shift, left or right, depending on whether or not Amuse wants, would prefer to have a little additional space in front of that area, if that's a desirable space, or, some other suggestions such as that.
Right. Well, I personally, I probably would have preferred the diagram to show a minimum of 7 foot wide pathway with the other yellow, but I understand your concept here, and so we can address that at the next meeting. I think that's fine. Any questions from the members? If not, we'll go to the next one, the low, I forget what it's called, low vehicle access zones. Excuse me. Any questions here? This is one option. Or this shows the non-tapered street, and it shows LVA at the end and a parking area, turnaround area. The next one is just showing what Alexis indicated is a concept. Could be used here, could be modified, could have a whole new concept, but it's indicative of a gateway type feature near the boardwalk. The next slide is Wilmington Avenue, second block. Everything we talked about Baltimore, I think, is applicable here. The next slide, first block. Again, this is a non-tapered, and it shows you the proposed sidewalk layout, the minimum 5 foot width, and that there's plenty of extra area beyond the 5 foot minimum, especially in the easterly end of the street. No questions. We'll go to the next one where it shows a one type of design for the low vehicle area zone at the end of the street.
I had a question, Mayor, and it's probably for you. If you had a limited vehicle access area, could that be used for something other than one of these park-like things? Could it be like kiosk space that the city rented out for pop-up things, for, you know, sidewalk sale here, or a snowball stand that somebody wanted to have for a week or two or something like that? Is there some possibility for some attraction and revenue for the city out of that?
I think there's a possibility. I think it's something that the mayor and commissioners would ultimately want to weigh in on, whether they want to do something like that. How I interpret that question in part is that when it says limited vehicle access plaza, to me that means it's a clear zone allowing vehicles to park in that area to load and unload. So if that is true, then necessarily, in my view, you would not have pavilions or trees or things like that. So
I guess what I was talking about also was the slide 2 previous that had the park-like area with trees and whatnot. Yeah, that.
Yeah. So go back one more. In fact.
Oh, that's perfect. That's kind of what I was thinking of limited vehicle.
Go back one more, Alexis. So there you've got it identified as a limited vehicle access area.
Right.
But it's incongruous with the next slide. So go back to the next slide, which is kind of a park area. You wouldn't have vehicles parked in that area.
Yeah, that's why I assumed, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, again, that's one of those things, right, that could be determined by the city as something that's a little more accessible, more desirable than just a more strictly pedestrian type area. But our idea being that, you know, these areas would be flush with the ground. There would be removable bollards. So feasibly you could get vehicles back here if needed, but it would not be where vehicles regularly are. So vehicles aren't regularly accessing these areas. And a lot of that's based on the fact that the way that we've cited these at the far ends of the streets, outside of where driveways, access to garages and parking lots is required, there's really no specific need for vehicles to regularly access these areas.
Thank you, Alex.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Howard Beneker.
Howard, yes, sir. Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah, sorry about that, Mayor. Alexis, I guess one of the questions I have is, in this illustration, which I realize is just an example, there is provided 12-foot wide vehicular access all the way to the boardwalk. So for emergencies, for maintenance vehicles, that sort of thing. On the Wilmington Avenue end, you just showed special paving. Would it be Rossi's recommendation that whatever the configuration of these areas, there always remains some sort of vehicular access all the way to the boardwalk?
I think that would have to be in consultation with the city to determine whether or not that's needed, or is there adjacent vehicular access to the boardwalk provided elsewhere that this wouldn't be necessary. But it was certainly a consideration of ours when we were sketching this out, especially with its approximation to the beach patrol. There might be a reason and a cause to be able to provide that emergency access. And in that case, we sketched that in.
Great, thank you.
But again, that's a consultation that would have to kind of be taken forward in the next step.
I agree, Howard, that's a good question, and I agree with the response, and that the mayor and commissioners would need to decide that. because the mayor and commissioners are the ones that decided where all the vehicular accesses were when the boardwalk was originally reconstituted. By example, a couple things at either location. The travel lane to accommodate heavy trucks is on the outer edge of the boardwalk. And so part of the boardwalk would have to be reconstructed to allow vehicles to enter at both of those locations. Also, at this particular location, the way the building is designed now to accommodate family restrooms, changing rooms, and there's no opportunity for a 12-foot wide lane on that side. It's going to be a little less. So those are things I think still that could be debated, but possibly not implemented. Thank you, Howard. Any other questions? We'll go to the next slide and the next slide. And then so here's kind of similar concept that was done for the end of Baltimore Avenue. Next slide. North First Street, second block, shows their one plan there. Any questions? Again, it's debatable, but that'll be for the next meeting. Next slide. I want to make sure everybody understands the red.
So I'm gonna, this is Patty Hoffman. So looking at these North First Street blocks, it looks like you're eliminating 40.
You want the previous slide?
All of them. All of them are fine. We can stay on this one. If you look at North First Street, from all 4 slides that are the one we just previous and 2 more that are coming up, it looks like they're eliminating all parking on North First Street, which, if I'm not mistaken, is about 41 parking spots. And I'm not supposed to give opinions right now, but wow. You've eliminated all the parking on North First Street, except for 4 spots between Baltimore and Maryland. That's a lot.
Well, again, we're going to debate it at the next meeting, Patty, if you don't mind. This is not that opportunity to do that. So I hear you, and I understand that.
I just want to point that out so everyone can think about that for the next meeting.
Right. Does everybody understand the red with that layout, which allows for 4 lanes essentially in the areas shown? It pinches the sidewalks to less than 5 feet, which to me is contrary to what this whole goal is. But I want to make sure everybody understands that slide. Any questions? If not, we'll go to the next slide. No questions?
Yeah.
We'll go.
Well, I guess, well, all right, I'll save it for next meeting.
I just have one general question. For
David,
the buffer area, thank you, Mayor. For the buffer areas, do we have a sense of if the trees that we have currently fit into those buffer areas, or if trees would need to be replaced? And second question is, if we have and this is probably for Rossi, if we have a situation where a tree that is not on city property is causing buckling of the sidewalk, can that be accommodated in the sidewalk design so that, I know there's a priority that the sidewalk stays even. Can that be accommodated in the design, or would trees that are currently causing buckling need to be removed?
Well, your first question is, we addressed, I think, 2 meetings ago when we indicated that the trees in the Streetscape project area very well might succumb to this project. Because trying to design a project to accommodate the existing trees is very challenging and not likely going to end up in a good result. And then as far as your second question in terms of trees, yeah, I think we would recognize that private property trees that are currently buckling the sidewalk are in contravention of the whole goal of this is creating a new pedestrian way. And so we would have to probably work with the property owner on what we're going to do to remedy the roots buckling and everything, well, even if it means replacing the tree. Do you have any different response? No? All right. All right. Thank you, David.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions for this particular slide? We'll go to South 2nd Street. Frank, this is, can you remember your question from 10 slides ago? Frank Cooper, you were talking about the left slide, I believe,
Right.
the area on South 2nd Street from Wilmington to Christian or Delaware.
Right, the lined shoulder or whatever they called it. It seems to me that in the blocks south of this, there is parking all along that street. So I don't think that it would just be, if they put 2 parking spaces there, I don't think they would be like sticking out. You know, they wouldn't be the only ones in the area, and it's currently used as a right turn lane that's excessively long. I have looked at it carefully over the last few weeks, and I have never seen traffic there back up and use that. So right now it's just sort of wasted space, and as we're looking at removing any other parking in other areas where we need to, because we need the space, any opportunity to add parking, we should look at it.
All right, well, we'll put that on for discussion at the next meeting, of course, when you share your opinion on that, and we'll get into that discussion. If there's no other questions on South 2nd Street, we'll move to overview of intersections. I think we can go through quickly of these, that we would likely have a bullet point to discuss these next meeting, as we've already identified turning radiuses and opinions from the fire company and beach patrol, police department, etc. So are there any questions on that one or the next one or the next one?
I have a question here. I see parking spaces counted for vehicles and scooters, but not bicycles. And I seen in the previous slides there have been excuse me, a lot of additional bike parking, and to me, I don't see the counterbalance here of like, we've lost X number of vehicle parking spaces. How many bike parking spaces have we gained? Is there any estimate of that?
Frank, we didn't estimate those areas because there's not a standard for how many bikes can park in a specific rack. Additionally, based on the conversations that we had with the city, where bike racks are proposed that could feasibly be moved within the pedestrian circulation path. So I guess to actually quantify it in the same way that it's quantified here isn't feasible, but you're exactly correct. We've certainly expanded in our sketch or in our concept where bike parking would be provided.
Frank, in these slides of the overview of intersections, you see the bulb outs each have bike parking areas. I think we can all individually just guesstimate that it looks like the amount of bike parking could be double, triple, even quadruple what is existing now. So
I just
from Alexis that it's hard to give a exact number, but it looks like it would be exponential to what we have now, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I do think we should try to move towards a number, just so that when we're evaluating losing the vehicle parking spaces, that we have some parameter of saying, okay, but we are gaining X. You know, even if it's just an estimate, you know, because but there are bike racks, so you can give some idea. And I think if Rossi could kind of get a general idea? It doesn't, nobody's going to hold them to the numbers. It's not like a parking space, but is it 20? Is it 50? Is it 100? You know, I mean, something in that.
Thank you, Frank. We can work on that. In fact, if Rossi doesn't do it, we'll confer with them, but we can also do that in-house, I think. And again, it would just be a guesstimate. Any other questions on over parking inventory questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Howard.
Yeah, just a question for Alex about your methodology. Did you propose your concepts for each block and then come to this total, if you will? Is it just a simple mathematical summation of what we've seen before, or was there a concept that we wanted to eliminate X or provide Y? And then I guess the second question is, I know there will be concern with the magnitude of the reduction of passenger vehicle spaces. So I didn't know if in your calculation, you had sort of a midpoint somewhere or ideas of where those could go back, or do you need to hear from us before you begin to consider that those options?
In drawing up our concept, we drew up the concept first and essentially fit the parking in later. So the proposed passenger vehicle parking is where it would fit in. As far as areas where passenger vehicle parking may be desired and some of the pedestrian circulation path we've shown might give way to that passenger vehicle, that would really be up to the task force and up to the city to provide us that guidance. Largely where a lot of our proposed scooter parking is shown adjacent to the roadway, what you'll see there is that those spaces didn't meet minimal vehicle parking zone or vehicle parking space requirements. So instead we've provided 3 scooter parking spaces or something to that effect.
Great.
Rather than letting that be dead space.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Howard. Frank, go ahead.
I have another question for you, Stan. Is there, in a future discussion on this, the possibility of talking about increasing parking in areas that are outside of the scope of the Washington-Baltimore Task Force area? In other words,
I think there's nothing formal made, but I would think that yes, soon we need to do a parking inventory throughout the whole town, and that would help us maximize the parking spaces outside the project area also.
Right. Okay, good. I was just worried about when we're making considerations of reducing parking spaces, are there other options in other areas that would mitigate this? So it would not be just a loss. Thank you very much.
I think this project will be the impetus for looking at additional parking opportunities because if you add up all the numbers here, the total reduction in parking is estimated at 85 parking spaces, but we gain an estimate of 46 scooter parking spaces. That's pretty significant overall. So I think you're right. We need to be thinking ahead on what opportunities do we have to replace the lost parking. Anybody else? If not, we'll go to the next slide, and the next slide is amenities. We're not ready for amenities. Vertical elements is an amenity. Next steps. I would like to share with you that the next steps, our next meeting is August 4th. That's where we'll resume this, and that's when we'll get into a discussion of each point that we need to resolve. And then I've also put on the calendar for August 11th as our last meeting on this topic, that if needed, we would meet then. I mean, it was possible we could finish August 4th, but if needed, August 11th. Because that keeps us on schedule with giving Rossi feedback on this concept introduction before August 13th, which is their deadline. And then again, a reminder that what we are headed to is giving them feedback, having them do some refinements, and then we're headed to a public workshop where we invite the public, invite neighbors to this project, invite all those with businesses within the project area to come and look at and critique and hopefully compliment us on some of our work there. So that is coming up. I want to thank everybody for trying to stick to the questions and not the opinions. It's hard to do because I know we've each got opinions, but this will give us all an opportunity to have a week to contemplate more. Dr. Trejos, are you on the line? David Garrett, are you on the line? Did you want to say anything?
Yes, I'm here.
Did you want to say, have any questions on anything? Remember, we're not talking about amenities yet, David.
I understand. My concern is I just want to put on the radar screen for this task force that there is interest on the part of members of Epworth United Methodist Church to engage in a project that is taking place across the country, and that is showing our inclusivity and diversity by painting a rainbow sidewalk. And
All righty. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. I don't mean to cut you off, but you know, when we communicated, we indicated that the appropriate time for that discussion is in the future when we're talking about amenities. So
okay, very good. Then I'm good. Nothing further for me to share today.
Appreciate it, David. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Dr. Trejos, are you available yet? Just give him 1 minute. He's actually working, and when he hears his name, his staff tries to grab him. And I wanted to give him, assuming he's not going to come on board, then I was going to just go ahead and let him articulate his PowerPoint presentation. It is embedded in the agenda and somewhat self-explanatory, I think. But we'll put that in the agenda for the August 4th meeting. With that, is there any further comment or questions from the members? Frank Cooper.
Yeah, I missed the slide when you were running through them. One of the line items was to increase lighting, and that's a laudable goal. I would note that there's been a kind of I'll call it a consensus for lack of a better word. We are moving towards dark sky compliance, and just wanted Rossi to be aware that the lighting we add, we would like them to consider dark sky compliant lighting when they increase lighting or make a recommendation. That's
well, we've already got a city policy on dark sky type compliant lighting, so that would definitely be on the radar, Frank.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. I understand, Dr. Trejos, are you on the line?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you very much for allowing me just briefly to speak. As you noted, my PowerPoint presentation is embedded in the minutes, and there won't be any further comment on my part today because we'll enter those discussions potentially next month. I will open any questions that anybody of the members of the task force have of me, but more importantly, I did want to just make one notation. We need to not forget that on Wilmington Avenue in the first block, there's a likely, eventual development and creation of the Belhaven Hotel complex, which would also potentially deal with traffic flow issues and pedestrian right-of-ways on the first block of Wilmington Avenue. That's just additional input. And again, if anyone has any questions for me, I'll end it at this point. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Trejos, break protocol here. If you can go through your slide presentation in 10 minutes, I would allow you to do that, or you can defer till the next meeting.
I can do that right now if that is okay with all the members. I have no problem with that.
10 minutes, not 11, 10 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Doc.
Thank you. Max, thank you for putting us up. Max, if we can go to the next slide, please. I believe what I was briefly trying to state here is the issues with regard to public safety and delivery trucks. And as I see it, as in my first slide here, I notated that the through lanes currently at the east end of Wilmington Avenue are at 42 feet. This can accommodate 3 vehicles, delivery vehicles side by side. Next slide. Max, next slide, please. Here's examples of photograph of the 3 vehicles side to side and the importance of having adequate through lane width to accommodate for this. Next slide. Next slide, Max. No, you're expanding instead of going down. Can you reduce the width? There you go. The other thing we need to take into consideration, very importantly, is delivery trucks require a significant depth from the boardwalk in order to make their deliveries. And this approaches literally approximately 120 feet. The property that we own on the left side of the pier, which would be Gus Zog's, and that the main property goes 63 feet, the other goes 50. So you can see it equals easily around 120 feet, if not greater. Next slide, please. The next 2 slides are showing panoramic views of these delivery trucks and how they park on various days. Next slide. And here again is another photograph to show you how they literally stack themselves when they make deliveries. Next slide. Therefore, the concern that I have raised here is that Rossi's proposed through lane width of 20 feet total at the boardwalk clearly is insufficient to properly address the necessary vehicles that need access to that east side. Next slide. And particularly first, public safety vehicle access needs to have adequate width at the end of the boardwalk, which truly exceeds that 20-foot minimum that is being proposed at this time. Next slide. And as you can see here, the 20 feet that is proposed would be insufficient to allow for both delivery trucks and private vehicles to be able to access that east side of Wilmington Avenue. Next slide. Therefore, it is my proposal that we need to continue to maintain the current width of 42 feet at the east end of the boardwalk, along with a depth of at least greater than equal to 120 feet to adequately provide for access for public safety vehicles, apparatuses, and delivery trucks. Next slide, please. Briefly, I believe Rossi has addressed this appropriately, but again, I just raised the concern that if the way the diagram has been drawn, it imposes upon the right-of-way of the private property owners on that North First Street of the first block. Therefore, any utilization of the city's use of that private right-of-way does also raise, therefore, legal liability issues for both the city and property owners. Next slide, please. Then I have noted here the significant intersection bottleneck at Wilmington Avenue at 2nd Street. I believe the police chief and also FAR are concerned about what transpires at that intersection. Most of us know that it's a rather significant bottleneck. The proposal of putting out bump outs with bicycle racks will only worsen the bottleneck problem there and therefore be detrimental to public safety. Next slide. Therefore, again, the proposal was that there should be, again, no parking zones, as you see here shown in red, that would eliminate that bottleneck and improve on public safety. Now that completes the slide presentation, and Mayor, just one other final notation that I think would be important to note. That same bottleneck problem is occurring at the intersection of Wilmington Avenue and First Street at the entrance to the second block, where you have the Avenue Hotel and the establishments along there. There are many times delivery trucks that often park at that intersection there. And again, Rossi is proposing additional bump outs with bicycle racks at those locations, which again would impede the ability of proper delivery of these trucks to their customers that they serve in that region. And thank you, Mayor. I'll stand by if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Trejos. You made my time frame, and I appreciate that very much. Are there any questions for Dr. Trejos? Again, his presentation is embedded in the agenda, and we'll embed that in the next agenda as well for our August 4th meeting. Would like to indicate that, again, our future meeting dates are Wednesday, August 4th at 9 a.m. and also August 11th if needed. Would like to let you know also that I'm very appreciative of all of your time and commitment to this important project. I would like to let you know that if you haven't picked up or you want hard copies, to email us at the addresses that you have from the last email, and we will print out a packet of the presentations for you. Also, if your eyes are bad like me, and there are particular pages that show the intersections or this kind of thing that you want blown up on 11 by 17 pages, then give us the individual numbers. If you notice there's a number in the corner of the presentation, rather than do a whole packet in 11 by 17s, we would be glad to selectively print out some of the designs and illustrations, schematics on 11 by 17 so you can pick them up here at City Hall. Just let us know. With that, is there any other questions? Comments, anything? I want to thank you all very much. We'll see you next Thursday. No, Wednesday. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Welcome here.